She pulled her hand away at dinner and said, "Don't pretend we're still married. My mom heard everything. I am a 34-year-old man." And my wife pulled her hand away from mine at a quiet Italian restaurant and said, in that trained calm voice she uses when she wants a scene without volume, that I shouldn't pretend we were still married. 2 tables over, my mother had just stood to get her coat. She heard every word. The drop of her shoulders was the sound my life made in public when it broke. The worst part was how careful it all looked. Candlelight, folded napkins, a server who moved like a whisper. Claire sat across from me with her chin lifted, the tiny gold necklace I bought her for our 3rd anniversary sitting right at the point of her throat. She said she didn't want to wear a ring like a costume anymore. She had rehearsed that line. I could hear the mirror in it. My mother froze with her scarf in one hand and didn't come over. She knew a good mother doesn't step into a fire until she knows where the exits are. Dinner was supposed to be a reset. My mother had asked us to meet her there because she missed eating with us. Because my father is gone, and the table is big and silence is louder when there are extra chairs. Claire had agreed, and even picked the place, which felt like relief until it didn't. The last few months had been full of excuses. Late nights closing the quarter, a new studio she needed to get to after work, a promise to schedule counseling that turned into a wait list I never saw. I called it burnout. She called it boundaries. We both pretended that was the same thing. I drove Mom home after Claire left early. She told me gently that denial isn't faith. I said I knew. I didn't. The next morning, I noticed the ring in the little dish by the sink next to a hair tie and a bobby pin. It looked like a tool no one knew how to use. The first flashback in this whole mess is not romantic. It's fluorescent. 3 years ago, in a bank office that smelled like old pens, Claire pushed a prenuptial agreement across a desk and called it a formality. She wanted to protect her future business. I had a consultancy and a decent savings account. We were the same kind of careful. I signed because trust felt like oxygen. It included a clause that sounded like trivia then. Inheritances and gifts remain separate property. We laughed and said we didn't come from the kind of families with wills that changed lives. My mother's only asset was the house my father painted twice and the piano that ate his Sundays. This winter, my mother asked me to help her update her will. Her handwriting shakes now. She wanted the house to become a trust so she could secure care if she needed it and I wouldn't have to sell under pressure. Claire sat at the table and nodded like a person listening to a podcast at 1.5x speed. Later she told me trusts make everything clean. The word sounded like bleach. By spring, Claire started correcting how I remembered things. She said I'd misheard her about the work trip that ate 2 weekends. She said I was projecting when I asked about the brand new lease terms for her studio, which turned out to be a 1-bedroom in a building with a doorman who calls everyone sir. Said her therapist wanted her to practice separating who I am from who you need me to be. I didn't ask the therapist's name. That's on me. I made a folder called Record because my brain needed something boring to hold. Receipts, dates, quick notes. The night she came home with a couch-sized bruise and said the movers dropped a box at the studio. The invoice for the studio, actually a residential lease under her maiden name. An email she forwarded to herself from our joint account with the subject line copy and no body. An alert from the storage unit we didn't have. Booked under C. Nolan with my card. There were moments of softness that should have saved us. She fell asleep on my shoulder during a stupid comedy, and I let Hope back in the room. She texted me a photo of a sandwich she made and wrote proud of myself for eating. I believed this meant she was letting me in. Later I found the same photo in a story sent to a private list with a caption about learning. Independence. It's strange how the same image can feed 2 narratives. The first big twist arrived. In a manila envelope addressed to my mother. She called me in the afternoon, voice small. She had received a letter from Claire encouraging her to consider her long-term care plan, with bullet points that included protecting the family home from liability through a transfer to an irrevocable trust managed by a third party. The third party proposed. Affirmed Claire's studio shared an address with. Claire had CC'd herself on my mother's estate conversation. She had not CC'd me. I confronted her that night, as gently as my pulse would allow. She said she was being helpful. She said my mother needed structure. She added that I often dropped balls, which is funny, because I carry lists like religion. Then she said the sentence that told me we were speaking different languages. If we separated, she didn't want to be responsible for our debt. We have no debt. She meant the house. She meant the piano. She meant my mother. The second twist was a document with my name on it that I didn't write. I received an automated thank you for attending email from a couples therapist I'd never met, referring to our work on your controlling behaviors. The attached intake form had both our names and signatures. My signature looked close and a little off, like a replica printed at 95%. The therapist when I called said she couldn't disclose anything. I asked if the form had been completed in person. She said remotely. She asked if I needed a referral. I hung up and sat on the stairs for a long time, counting each tread with my thumb. The third twist was a calendar alert Claire forgot to hide. Registry appointment with the county clerk. The memo field said status change. I didn't even know what that could mean until I searched. Some people file legal separations like they file taxes quietly. With a list, It makes everything afterward more agreeable for one party. Guess who I took a day off work and walked to the river and called my friend Matt, who had lived through a divorce that tried to erase him. He told me to get a lawyer who likes paper more than speeches. He told me to stop sending paragraphs and stick to single sentences. He told me to eat protein. He was right about all three. Claire staged one more humiliation before the restaurant. A family brunch where she told my mother, smiling, that I was making progress with my temper, and then explained to my aunt that we were sleeping, separate for clarity. I didn't correct her because I could hear every woman at that table lining up their concern behind her description. After brunch, my mother asked, careful as a person approaching a high shelf, if I had been unkind. I wanted to be angry, she asked. I was just tired. The night before the dinner, I went to our apartment to get a sweater and found the living room paused mid-move. Boxers labeled linens, dishes, books, seeds, we don't garden stacked by the door. The picture of us in Lisbon gone from the mantel. On the kitchen counter, a printed email, lease approval for another unit in the same building as her studio, this time a 2-bedroom, starting next month. Her name only. At the restaurant, I'd wanted to pretend we were okay long enough to give my mother a gentle night. That care became a target. Claire pulled her hand back, said the line, and left. And I watched my mother stand rooted under the dim chandelier, looking at me like I was both her son and a man she didn't recognize. On the drive to Mom's, the phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of the storage unit corridor and Claire's hands holding a box labeled heirlooms. The caption said, "Don't worry, I'm keeping these safe." I pulled over and breathed until the world had edges again. Heirlooms meant my father's watch and my grandmother's recipe cards and the quilt that smells like cedar. Safe had a new definition. At home, I took out record and started adding everything I had been too naive to write down. The prenup clause about separate property, the lease approvals, the fake intake form, the email to my mother, the storage unit, the status change appointment. I added what I knew in boring sentences. She is building a life without me using my family's scaffolding. She is telling rooms I am dangerous without saying those words out loud. She will call it clean when the house is empty. Then I added one more line because I could feel a different kind of storm. If she is already telling people we aren't married, she has already told someone who will believe her first. The last rebonding of that week came from the building's doorman, who isn't supposed to tell anyone anything. He asked how I was, and then, without waiting, said Claire had left 2 packages under C. Nolan resident. He emphasized the new name, like a man who has seen a lot and is tired of pretending to be surprised. C. Nolan is her maiden name. Resident is a place I didn't live. I took the elevator to the unit I wasn't meant to know about. The hall smelled like lemon cleaner and money. I didn't knock. I stood there and listened to the quiet and pictured a second set of keys, a second cutlery drawer, a second bed with the sheets tucked her way. Then I went home and wrote one more sentence in record. I will not be shamed out of my own story by good lighting. The next morning, I called a lawyer named Peter whose website had no sunsets and promised order. He told me to bring paper. He told me to stop sleeping at the apartment until we knew where the lines were. He told me to stop talking to Claire about feelings and only talk about logistics. He told me to have my mother call a different attorney about the house immediately. He said silence is a strategy. Use it. He said dinner in public was not an accident. Humiliation is leverage. He used small words and got me breathing again. I hung up and texted Claire a single sentence. All future communication about property or finances should be by email. She replied with, "I'm worried about your tone." That went straight into record. 2 hours later, my mother called to say Claire had dropped by to apologize and then asked to see the piano. For movers to measure, my mother, who has taught Sunday school for 30 years, said she told Claire the piano wasn't going anywhere unless it grew legs. Then she asked me if I wanted tea. I said yes and cried in my car like a man who finally believes his own notes. I walked into my mother's kitchen and found on the table a business card Claire had left behind for the trust firm she likes. On the back, in her script, a list, keys, appraisal, insurance, utilities, accounts. It looked like a Toto list for stealing a life. I added the card to record and sat with my mother and drank tea that tasted like resolve. I didn't plan revenge. I planned sequence. First, a hold on the storage unit charges. Second, a letter from my mother's attorney to the trust firm. Third, a notice to Claire's counsel that any removal of property from my mother's home would be considered conversion. Fourth, an email to Claire stating plainly that the marriage was not over until it was over in court, and she should stop telling rooms otherwise. Fifth, sleep. When I closed my eyes, I saw her hand pulling away, and under it, every small pole that led to it. The second phone I wasn't supposed to see at the bottom of her tote. The lunches that became strategy. The ring in the dish by the sink. I slept anyway. I woke up to 2 emails. One from Claire's therapist, inviting me to book a solo session to manage my reactivity, and one from the county clerk. An auto-confirmation for a filing under Claire's maiden name. Petition to legalize a separation agreement. In the attachment, a draft agreement with blanks for my signature and clauses about mutual respect, no disparagement, and exclusive possession of her residence. At the end, a list of property to be inventoried, including family heirlooms of sentimental and financial value presently in storage. My name appeared exactly once. As the party who agreed to cooperate peacefully, I stared until the words stopped vibrating. Then I took a photo of the screen and added it to record. That night at Mom's, we ate soup and made a list of the things we would do in order. We put breathe at the top, because the body forgets. I told her the parts she hadn't heard at the restaurant, the tone Claire used. ThePebbleandTopon.com. My mother said the sentence I'd needed without knowing. I will not let her rewrite who you are in my house. We locked the piano room, we checked the windows. We put the watch and the recipe cards in a safe deposit box and kept the key where only my mother knows. We slept. In the morning, a flower delivery arrived addressed to my mother from Claire Lilies. The heavy kind, with a card that said, "I hope we can keep things loving." My mother put the vase on the porch and said lilies belong outside. I added the florist invoice. Charged to our joint card? To record, I drove to Peter's office with a binder that made him smile the way men who like papers smile when they see a kindred system. He flipped through and said we would be okay if we stayed boring and didn't blink. Then he pointed at the draft separation agreement and said, almost cheerful, that they'd overreached. He handed it back and told me to take a picture of the table number from the restaurant, the timestamp from my mother's phone, the ring in the dish by the sink. He said humiliations become leverage when they aren't documented. He said courts prefer receipts to drama. I left with a list, a plan, and a clean ache where some Navit used to live. The last thing I did before the next blow landed was simple. I moved the ring from the dish to a small velvet box and put the box in the drawer with the spare batteries. I wanted it near something mundane, not on display like a souvenir from a country I wasn't welcome in anymore. The blow landed the same afternoon. My aunt forwarded a message from Claire, a mass text to family asking for privacy while we navigate a separation, framing it as an amicable decision due to ink, and thanking everyone for their support during this transition. The word transition made my skin crawl. The lie was gentle, which is the worst kind. I wrote one sentence back to the thread. Please direct any questions to me by phone. Then I turned my phone off and sat on the porch with my mother and watched the streetlights come on, one by one, like a lesson in patience. The next day we found out who else Claire had told we weren't married. It wasn't family. It was the bank. The branch manager called to confirm the change in mailing preference for the Nolan household. Nolan, not my name. He sounded bored. I asked what he meant. He said, Claire had updated the address on 2 accounts to her new residence and requested paperless statements for everything else for safety. Safety slid into my ear like a verdict. I asked when. He said yesterday at 3:21 p.m. while I was telling my mother not to worry over lilies. Peter fired off emails like blessed lightning. He told the bank to freeze unilateral changes pending a dispute. Reminded them politely that accounts aren't houses. You don't repaint them without consent. He CC'd me, and I printed it because I print everything now. Paper is the only language in this season that doesn't gaslight. The next twist arrived by accident. A neighbor of my mother's saw Claire at the storage facility and called my aunt to ask if the remodel was starting. Remodel? She sent a photo of Claire wheeling a dolly piled high with boxers labeled dining, silver, photo albums. She wasn't stealing. She was staging for valuation, as her email later claimed, adding that divorces require clarity. I sent it to Peter. He replied with a sentence I now hear in my sleep. Get a police report to document possession. Don't accuse theft, document interference. At the station, the officer listened politely and wrote slowly. He told me these things get ugly when people try to win the story with speed. He gave me a case number like a bandage. I checked my phone and found a new message from Claire, a list of weekends she would be out of town and available for mediation after. The list overlapped precisely with the only dates the county clerk offered for hearings. Delay is an art. She paints with it. I broke my own rule that night and wrote more than one sentence. I told Claire I would not meet privately without counsel, that I would not be baited into scenes, that my mother's property was not part of any negotiation, and that our marriage would end in a courtroom, not in captions. She replied that my tone frightened her, and that she would be documenting that, and I watched the word frightened go to work like a small, efficient machine. Another twist. An email from the therapist whose signature I didn't recognize with a PDF titled Safety Plan. It contained advice about staying with friends, keeping copies of documents, and teaching children a code word. We don't have children. The document was built for rooms where bad things happen. It was not built for a man sitting at a kitchen table with a binder, a mother, and a lawyer who likes bullet points. I did not reply. I forwarded it to Peter. He wrote back that certain narratives get traction because they are we would stay facts first. Moments of normal tried to live in the cracks. I helped my mother fix a cabinet hinge. I went running by the canal. I cooked rice and forgot to salt it and ate it anyway because hunger doesn't care how triumphant you look. I texted Matt a photo of the binder and he replied with a thumbs up and a sandwich emoji. His way of saying keep feeding yourself. The cat, who is technically my mother's, decided I was a piece of furniture and slept on my feet. Small mercies are still mercies. Then, finally, a twist that felt like oxygen. A misdirected email from the trust firm Claire favored, addressed to her but sent to our joint inbox by mistake. It referenced representing Claire in a transfer of leadership for Nolan Creative, her studio, and noted that the optics of a clean separation are key to closing the VC bridge. A clean separation means investors like seeing no messy spouse attached to cap tables or contracts. My marriage was a line item in her pitch deck. I printed it twice. I underlined optics, I put it in record, and I watched any residual guilt get quiet. I didn't want to hurt her. I wanted the truth to have a chair in the room. Peter read the email, made a small, satisfied sound, and drafted a letter to her counsel. We would not sign any separation agreement prior to full financial disclosure of her business interests, and any investor communications referencing marital status. He used words like compelled production and sanctions if misrepresentation is found. He does not do sunsets. He does teeth. Claire showed up at my mother's house 2 days later with grocery store flowers and a friend I didn't know. The kind with perfect eyebrows and a lawyer's tote. She said she wanted to make peace. She said the house made her emotional because it held memories of my father. She said we could be modern and gracious. I stepped onto the porch and did not invite them in. I said any future visits required scheduling through counsel. Her friend smiled like a dentist and handed me a card. Claire looked past me into the hallway where the piano used to be. It wasn't there. We'd moved it to a relative's. After documenting serial numbers and signatures, the look on her face wasn't grief. It was annoyance at a missed item on a list. That night, another neighbor sent a screenshot from a private social post. Claire, at a dinner, toasting with a caption about soft life earned, not given. Comments from people who used to call me by my first name, and I wrote like they couldn't remember it. I closed the app and went for a walk. On the way back, I saw in my mother's mailbox a thick envelope, a formal notice that the petition to legalize separation had been filed. It contained affidavits referring to irreconcilable differences, emotional distance, and a long-standing pattern of control. The only specifics were my preference for planning and my insistence on updating my mother's will rewritten as me pressuring an elderly parent. Claire had taken my care for my mother and turned it into a villain's scene. I didn't argue in text. I wrote a timeline instead. Every appointment my mother had asked me to schedule. Every email where Claire initiated the trust talk. Every charge Claire put on our card for eldercare consultations. I attached the trust firm email about optics. I gave it to Peter, and he said, good, and that I had to be ready for the next part, an attempt to bleed me with process. Process did arrive. In a wave of requests that looked like bureaucracy and felt like drowning. Bank statements, leases, insurance policies, tax filings, copies of messages. I made piles and went to work. Claire's side demanded access to my mother's medical records, claiming concern. Peter grinned without humor and replied with a refusal and a note that this smelled like phishing. He copied her counsel, who wrote back about best intentions. That phrase is what liars use when receipts are visible. At the first hearing, the judge's hair was neat and her questions were sharper than Claire expected. She asked why a woman who wanted privacy had sent a separation announcement to a family group chat. She asked why heirlooms were in a storage unit rented with funds from a joint account. She asked who Nolan was on the lease. Claire's lawyer said that was a clerical error. Peter handed up the lease addendum showing it was not. The judge ordered a standstill. No more property moves. No changes to accounts. No pressuring elders. All communication through counsel. I breathed for what felt like the first time in a month. The next weekend, the storage facility sent a breach notice. Someone had tried to access the unit after hours using a code that didn't exist. I forwarded it to Peter and to the officer handling the case number. He shrugged in email form. It's good you documented. I went to the unit during daylight and took photos of each box and sent them to my mother, who cried a little at the sight of the word PHOTO albums in my handwriting and said the sentence you cling to in storms. We're okay, Dad. Another twist landed in my lap without effort. A client of mine forwarded a deck from a pitch meeting she'd attended. Claire had used my mother's house in a slide titled Foundations, implying lineage and stability and home equity support, as if the trust she tried to maneuver were a badge of competence. I sent the slide to Peter and watched him light up. He added it to a motion about misrepresentation and asked for Claire's investor communications under oath. Her counsel went suddenly slow. Optics don't like subpoenas. Then came a text I didn't expect, from Claire's mother. She asked to meet me for coffee. She said she was sorry for what you're going through, which was not an apology but was not nothing. At the cafe, she told me she had raised a daughter who thinks reinvention is a religion. She said she loved her and didn't excuse her. She asked me not to destroy Claire's business. I said I didn't want to destroy anything. I wanted boundaries to be real. Her eyes were tired. She said boundaries don't trend. She left, and I added the conversation to nothing at all. Not everything goes in record. Some things just sit in your chest and slowly change shape. Court is slow, but it moves. The judge set a schedule for disclosures. Claire objected to half of it and lost most. Her side floated mutual non-disparagement. Peter said we'd agree with a carve-out for court filings and elderly care. They tried for exclusive possession of the studio, Peter wrote. It's already hers. They tried to list my mother's heirlooms as marital property of sentimental value to both parties. Peter attached the receipts and the serial numbers and a photo of my father at the piano in 1996. The judge didn't smile. She said, denied. Under pressure, small truths leak. Claire's counsel finally admitted the status change. Appointment had been to update her tax filing as separate to make her business cleaner, not to legalize separation. The judge asked why she told family we were navigating a separation, then filed for one later. Her counsel said she had been manifesting. The judge looked like a woman who has seen many redecorated lies. She ordered the parties to mediation. Mediation wasn't peace. It was a room with a round table, a neutral who had heard every story, and two people who used to share a grocery list, learning how to speak in the third person. Claire called our marriage a long goodbye. I called it a long repair she walked away from. She said, I made lists like weapons. I said lists were what kept the lights on. The mediator asked what we could agree on. No more contact with my mother by Claire. Preservation of all heirlooms. Joint audit of accounts with a neutral. No negative posts. A clean dividing line. She keeps her business. I keep mine. Neither touches the house. Claire wanted the piano. The mediator said that was a hill not to die on. Claire wrote piano in her notebook and drew a small X next to it like a map. The actual end was not cinematic. We signed a separation agreement with terms that protected what mattered. The judge incorporated it. The bank reversed her address changes and sent a letter saying sorry for the confusion, which is what institutions write when they were almost helpful to the wrong person. The storage unit's contents returned to my mother's living room. We opened the box of recipe cards and the house smelled like flour that doesn't exist anymore. Claire's deck changed. The slide about foundations became a photo of a white wall and a fern. There were still humiliations to metabolize. Some relatives kept their distance, like embarrassment was contagious. A mutual friend told me I'd embarrassed her by involving court, as if court is tacky and private paper theft is chic. I went to work, paid my taxes, ran by the canal, ate food without photographing it. My mother watered the lilies Claire sent until they died and then took the vase to the thrift store. She kept the card in a drawer labeled Things We Lived Through. Claire posted a photo of herself holding a key with a caption about sovereignty. Her business closed a bridge round. People congratulated her. Someone tagged me by mistake and then untagged. I let all of it float past. My revenge looked like me not answering. The last twist came in the form of a small kindness. The doorman handed me a package addressed to resident because they still hadn't fixed the system. Inside was the gold necklace I'd given Claire years ago, wrapped in tissue. No note. I took it to my mother and put it in the drawer next to the safe deposit box key. It is not a symbol. It is an object. Not everything has to mean something to be over. I moved my things out of the apartment in 2 trips. I left a note inside the velvet ring box saying nothing at all. Silence felt like the truest sentence I had. On my way out, the neighbor with the loud dog asked if I was the husband. I said used to be and felt both too young and, exactly my age, at my mother's table. The walnut scar where my father once dropped a skillet caught the light. She asked if I was okay. I said today I was. I told her I was sorry she heard the sentence at the restaurant. She said hearing it there saved us months. Public shame made me move. That's the only compliment I will ever give to humiliation. It ends the year faster. I'm not going to end this with a lesson about resilience. I don't know if I'm resilient. I know I have a binder that kept me sane when someone else wrote the softer version of what happened. I know my mother's house still smells like the lemon oil she uses on Sundays. I know the piano is safe and the recipe cards are in their drawer. I know that when someone pulls their hand away in public, they've already practiced in private for months. She pulled her hand away at dinner and said not to pretend we were still married. My mother heard everything. Good. Pretending is what got us here. I live smaller now, 1 bedroom, 1 set of keys, 1 calendar with no secret addresses. I keep copies of what matters and let go of the rest. If you passed me on the street, you wouldn't know anything. I like that. Quiet is not the same as silence. It's a room where I can hear myself without anyone narrating over me. That's the life I plan to keep, paperwork and all.
Follow me for more stories.